Indeed. Thank you, guys. That last song is indeed... Was there one more? Well, yeah, I'm like, why is everybody silent? Did I come up too soon? Yeah. That is actually an astounding thing to sing there. When Moses, like it says at the beginning of the song, you know, when God passed him by, he could only see him from the back. And in the Old Testament, it was often thought if you see God, you would die. And yet, in the New Testament, we hear that we have the freedom, the vrymoedigheid. What's that in English? Can't remember the vrymoedigheid. It's lost now. But we have, through Jesus Christ, it says in Hebrews, we have the freedom to approach the Lord. I mean, it's an astounding thought that we can sing, Lord, we would like to see you. And it is a wonderful thing. And good, with the song that we just sung, indeed, we are going to Exodus. Not exactly to the space or to the chapter that we sang about Moses asking God to see him, but a little earlier to Exodus chapter 19, which at first glance may not seem like the most interesting chapter, because we often focus on the chapters before, which are the exciting things of, you know, the plagues in Egypt and moving out into the desert and all the wondrous things that happen there, or the chapters after this, where God gives his commands and writes on stone tablets and the very sad story of the golden calf and things like that. But as one person who has written about this chapter says, this is actually a very important chapter in Israel's history. And let's see why. Let's read again, or read the text. Verse 1. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. Short 8 verses, but listen to verse 4 again. Or verse 3, that where God says, descendants of Jacob and the people of Israel. Verse 4, "You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." With this short summary, God reminds them of everything that has happened the last 3 months, because it was a lot. And it's good to put ourselves a bit into the shoes of what the Israelites had been going through in this time, because it was quite dramatic. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt. God reminding them of the beginning of Exodus, where you guys know Israel were slaves in the land of Egypt. But God hears their cries and thinks of his covenant. Already the mention of the people of Israel or the descendants of Jacob makes one think of this thing of God's relationship with their forefathers. And he thinks of this covenant, his special relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God acts, first by calling Moses and then sending him back to Egypt. And then we read those dramatic stories of confrontation. Think of yourselves as an Israelite in those days. Now you're toiling. Moses comes back. The work gets even harder because initially Moses' approach to Pharaoh doesn't go so well. And then these plagues start. You see the Nile turning into blood. You see the frogs. You see the insects. You see the darkness. You see the boils. You've been going through all of this, or at least being a witness to what happened. And then suddenly hearing you can go. And you pack up your things and, you start leaving Egypt and you're excited, but then you get to the sea, the Reed Sea or the Red Sea, depending on which translation you follow. And suddenly your back is against the wall because Pharaoh has decided, no, man, I'm not going to let all my cheap labor go. Let's go fetch them. And he sends his whole army. And there you are, stuck between guys who want to kill you and the sea. And suddenly God opens the waters and the Israelites can go through safely, and once they're through it comes back and it covers Pharaoh's army, and now they're really free from Egypt, saved from slavery, but now they find themselves in the desert. And like Israel often does, they start murmuring a bit, being a bit iffy, but God cares for them. He provides food and water and shelter, and He brings them in through and protects them from enemies that He, like He describes it here, I bring you here on eagle's wings. It's a beautiful description. And then He says, I brought you to myself. And this little phrase actually shows God is true to His word, because many chapters back in chapter 3, when God is speaking to Moses at the burning bush, He says, this will be the proof that I have called you, is you and your people will come worship me at this mountain. And now they are here, the exact place. It's all a sign of Israel's salvation. They have been taken away from Pharaoh, they've been taken out of slavery, and they have been brought to God. This is all the work of the Lord. So in this short sentence, God confirms and describes to Israel, there's already a relationship between us. I have been caring for you for months now. I have looked upon the difficult situation you were in. And this relationship goes far, far back to your forefathers. As far as back as Genesis 12, where we read how God establishes His covenant with Abram and his descendants. And as we come to Exodus, it is this covenant and a relationship. A covenant is a special set relationship with the Lord. It's this relationship that becomes the grounds for God taking action. We read in Exodus 2, the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abram, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So from there, they are already in a relationship with the Lord, and He confirms it to them again. But now He expands it, and He gives it a further dimension as we read in verse 5. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. God makes it clear to them. If you now live according to the principles I'm going to give you, then you will be my treasured possession. It's a lovely description. The words they use refer to a very special possession, often that of a king. Something that is only the king's, that only the king is allowed to use or handle or look upon. It's not for anybody else's usage. That's what it means, that you are my special possession and nobody else is allowed to take possession of you. And if you think about it, what an amazing thought that must be for an Israelite at the foot of Sinai to hear. 3 months ago, just over 3 months ago, you were a slave in Egypt who had no rights, who had no meaning, who was a living tool, because that was what a slave was. You were a nobody and a nothing, and now God says to you, you, as part of Israel, are my treasured possession. You are precious to me. And then he says, he expands even more by saying, if you keep this covenant, you will be a holy nation, or a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. He gives them an identity and a calling. People who were no people, who were just a bunch of ragtag slaves in Egypt, are now given an identity and calling by the Lord. First part, that you will be a kingdom of priests, is quite a striking description. We don't often find it in the Old Testament of the whole country. But remember who priests were. Priests were people who made God's will known and His grace known and mediated it to people. They were the channel through which God's grace flows. And then the holy nation is found, it's a term that is found more often in the Old Testament. The holy nation means that people are set apart for God. They are different to the other nations, and God puts them aside for a purpose. That He says, the whole world is mine. That's clear. But you guys are set apart for a specific purpose and for a calling that I have for you. That if you live according to my will, according to the commandments I give, according to the covenant principles that I'm now going to give you, you will show and mediate something of God's grace and goodness and love to the world, to the nations around you. It's never about just themselves. That because they are God's special chosen possession, they have a task, a calling aimed at the whole world. Like one writer says, if the whole nation is a priesthood, then the whole world is a parish. They are here to live out God's principles so that people might see. And as we continue, we read in this passage, Moses gives God's words to the elders of the people, and it is implied that the elders go speak to the rest of the people, because we read in verse 8 that they say, the people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. Now this is a bit strange. Why? Because they're already saying, God, we will do everything you ask of us, but they don't know yet what God is asking. That's like almost me saying, before I read the contract, I'll already sign it that I accept it. And if you've ever signed a contract, that's not a wise thing to do, guys. Read the thing before you sign it. But in this case, you can almost say, if you place yourselves in the shoes of an Israelite, it becomes understandable. They have been reminded of God's long-term relationship with them. The past few months, they have experienced how good and how loving and how caring God is, and that He's looking after them. They've experienced His amazing salvation and His power. They have experienced that God brings freedom, and all this goodness of the Lord convinces them that they can accept what God is going to ask of them. They can accept His laws and principles because they know He is a good God, even if they don't have all the details yet. You can almost see it as a statement of intent, that Israel says, we're willing to commit to these laws, Lord, that you are going to give, even though we don't understand them yet or know them yet, because we know you are good. And if we carry on reading, which we will do, we see how it happens. In chapter 10, in chapter 20, God gives the 10 commandments, and then it is followed by some more instructions. And then in chapter 24, Israel again confirms their willingness to live according to the covenant instruction, and then Moses seals the whole thing by sprinkling them with the blood of the offerings, saying this is now fully confirmed. Your relationship with the Lord and how you're going to live out this relationship. So it's a short passage, but it's actually a very critical moment in Israel's history. And it gives us a few very important insights into our faith. And the first is the connection and the interweaving between God's relationship with us and the commands He gives us, the instructions He gives us. Because look carefully at what happens before God gives His commandments to His people. God first brings them under the impression of the relationship that He has with them. The relationship that's called a covenant. He has saved them. He is caring for them. He is already in a relationship with them. And only then, after He has confirmed we are in a relationship, does He start giving it further depth and meaning and dimension and form by describing to them how this relationship is going to work. He gives insight into how you should live out this relationship between yourself and God. And also between Israelites amongst themselves and Israelites and other peoples. And this is very, very, very important for us because God's covenant relationship with us and the commandments He gives us must not be separated from each other, but they must also be put into the right order. If you separate them, two things can happen. On the one hand, if you think of it, if there are no instructions, no laws, no commandments, a relationship can become, no expectations. A relationship can sort of become empty and meaningless. Because how do I live in a relationship if I don't understand how this relationship works, or I don't get the dynamics of the relationship, or I don't know how me and you should communicate and live together? So the commandments and the instructions that God gives are ways for Israel to understand how to live in a relationship with Him. But on the other hand, and this is the big danger if you separate relationship and rules, if the commandments are separated from God's covenantal relationship with us and from His love for us, there is the danger of legalism, of moralism, and even the error of where we think that by obeying God's commands we get saved. And that our relationship with God depends firstly on achieving all the laws and then being saved. This is what happened in some of the Jewish traditions and other traditions. The bad idea that God gives all these laws so that I can tick them off. If I can do all the commandments, then He will save me. But that's wrong. If you give the commandments an independent status and as if they are a goal in themselves, separated from the relationship that God has started with you, then they become things, then they become a burden. Then they are open to misinterpretation. Then we struggle like those trying to achieve salvation through works. But if we understand that God has said, I have saved you, in our case through Christ, now I give you instruction to show you how to live out of this salvation, then suddenly the relationship becomes rich and deep. God confirms to Israel and to us and reminds us of His relationship with us, and then He gives further insight into how the relationship should play out. And in the end, these commandments God gives enable the people of Israel to live out their calling as priests and as a holy nation that points to God. Now, often, those of you who have tried to read Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Old Testament laws are sometimes difficult for us to understand. We may even feel negative about a bunch of them. We don't know how we should apply them for today. They're strange. But if you start to do a bit of research and you place them in the greater picture and you get more background, then they gain new meaning. And you see why they were meaningful in that time. They were a way for Israel to point to the Lord. This small, unimportant nation in the context of the greater ancient nations. I mean, remember, Israel was, for most of its history, except under David and Solomon, but for most of its history, Israel was a small little nation against Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, the Persians. Yet, God chooses them and empowers them so that they may be a witness to him and draw other people to him. So today, we are not called to follow these laws that are given exactly like they are stated, but we can learn from them and gain insight into how our actions and ways of doing can point to God. We can reflect and learn on how to give form to our identity as the special people of God within a secular world full of unbelief. Now, centuries after these words were spoken and the things happened on Sinai, centuries after this, in the first century after Christ, the Apostle Peter writes to another group of very unimportant people. And he echoes these words. In the first century, Christians were not an important group in the Roman Empire. They were relatively few, they were spread out far apart, and in the eyes of most, they were insignificant. But Peter writes to a group of Christians in his first letter, and he says to them, he acknowledges their status as strangers in the world. But then he tells them, you guys have also been chosen and sprinkled with the blood of Christ. The new covenant is confirmed with you as God's people. And then he writes the following in 1 Peter 2 to those first Christians, those in the eyes of the world meaningless little group of people. And he says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, treasured possession. That, and this is the important thing, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So now the New Testament people of God also hears, you are chosen, you are part of the covenant relationship with God, and you are also now kingly priests who must mediate something of God's goodness to the world. That's why you are here. And if we continue with Peter's letter, if you were to go read it tonight, and we read the other letters of the New Testament, we see exactly the same pattern each time. God saves people. It is confirmed to them that they are saved. You are in a relationship with him. And then the rest of the letter, after this has been confirmed, is about how to live a Christian life. The same thing as we read of in Exodus 19. Relationship first, salvation, and then instruction on how to live in this relationship, and not the other way around. And then Peter and the others describing what values and laws and principles they must live out so that they can embody their relationship with the Lord. And people can start to ask, but what's going on in your life? There's something special here. So you and I, those of us sitting here, the community of faith today, you and I are also in a relationship with the Lord. That is why we are here. We are saved by Christ, as we celebrated recently during Easter, and you and I are also chosen kingly priests and a holy nation. And as a community of faith, we aim to understand and to discern and to apply God's commandments for our day and age. And this is important because we are not just supposed to take the laws of the Old Testament just like that, and even some of the laws in the New Testament, and apply them directly for today. We are called to think about what they mean and understand them for today and interpret them for today, and then by adhering to them, to embody them in such a way that we point to the Lord, to the God that is in relationship with us, and to mediate something of God's care and his goodness to other people so that they can also experience it. Our doing what God asks of us is a way to experience the fullness of our relationship with him and to make others aware of him. So that with that in mind, We are going to take a look at the 10 Commandments throughout the rest of the year. We're not all going to do them in after one another, because that'll be 10 weeks of 10 Commandments, and it might get a little too much. So we're going to do a few and then do a breakaway text and do a few and do a breakaway text. But we're going to go through them and think, how should we apply this law of the Lord for today in the situation we are in? You and I, as a community of faith, God comes to us again and says, I'm in a relationship with you. Live in accordance with my will for your life. So to answer that calling, I want to invite you to do what the Israelites did that day and to declare your willingness to follow God's law. And we're going to do that by standing and reciting the 10 Commandments so that we can refresh our memory, be reminded of what God asks for us, and as a way, as statement of intent to say, Lord, I hear you, and I wish to commit to this as well. So let us stand and pray and say it together. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. You can have a seat.